Hello everyone. Today I'll be presenting my paper titled Patch Match Based Stereo Image Inpainting using a layered approach. Let us start by defining image inpainting. Inpainting is a conservation process where damaged, deteriorated, or missing parts of an image are filled in to present a complete image. We've all been at a point where we've taken a digital photo and wished that some object or some person in that photo did not exist. And the way of covering them up in that photo is called inpainting. Let's talk about the two main image inpainting algorithms that are widely used in 2D images. The first one is partial differential equation based inpainting, which propagates the color information along the isophores from outside to inside the blank regions according to a third order PDE. If you look at the image on the top, it's an old photograph that has a few lines and cracks in between. Now, if we want to cover these regions up, the color information that is on the boundaries of these blanks can be propagated inside. This can be done using PDE technique, in which the boundaries and the structures of the image are still maintained. You can have a look at the girl in the center. Even though the parts of her face are covered by the hole, the structure of her face is still maintained. This kind of inpainting is more suitable when the holes are small. The next kind of inpainting is texture synthesis, in which we fill the target area through texture replication. Now in the bottom image, if we want to remove the person from the scenery, we can do that by copying the textures from around the areas and pasting it over him. Now if we use PDE instead of that, we get an image that's similar to the second one, which is very blurred out. That's because only the color information is diffused inside, but no texture is maintained. But if you look at the last image, we can see that the texture is proper and all the leaves and the trees and even the stone is very clear. That is only possible because the texture patches from around the image are copied over to these missing areas. Over the years, a lot of work has been done in texture synthesis based image inpainting. But one main computational overhead that existed was in finding the correct patches or the nearest neighborhoods. So this changed when patch match was introduced in 2009. It works on the principle that some good patches can be found via random sampling and that the natural coherence in the imagery allows us to propagate such matches quickly to the surrounding areas. Let's understand what this means to the three steps that this algorithm has. So if you look at these images, let's suppose that we have to find out regions in the image B that are similar to regions in image A. In the first step, we match every region in A to a random position in B. While most of these regions are not the correct matches, at least some of them are the correct ones or in the vicinity of the correct ones. Now in the next step, which is the propagation step, we try to propagate the incorrect matches towards the correct ones. So we do that by comparing the match of each boundary with the match of the region that's above it and with the match of the region that's next to it. So if you look at this example, in A, there are three regions, blue, red, and green. And let us suppose that the red match is correct, or at least close to correct. So when we are processing the blue region, we compare its match with, or the correctness of its match with the correctness of the green area's match and to the correctness of the red area's match. Since red area's match is closer to being correct, we move the blue area's match to the one that's right next to the red area's match. This way we are propagating all the incorrect matches towards the correct ones. But one thing that's still possible is that we are stuck in a local minima within the image. So in order to get out of that, we compare this match, the propagated match of blue, with random areas in concentric circles of the entire image. So this way we are checking if there is any better match in the entire image, and if we do find one, we move the blue areas match away. So these three steps are repeated multiple times and in many iterations, and mostly around the end of the fifth or sixth iteration we find good enough match for every region in the image. So far, we have discussed about what inpainting means and what are the different techniques that exist. Now let's talk about what causes the holes in stereo images and how different it is from 2D images. So stereo images are just left and right images which are 2D by themselves. So most of the reasons that holes exist in a 2D image still happen in a 3D image. But let's talk about a few of them. One is object removal. So if we want to remove an object from an image, the area that the object was covering in that image is now exposed and contains a hole. We don't know what information exists in that region, and hence we need to fill that. Another reason where a hole could exist is when we are moving the objects around in the same image. And one more thing that's specific to 3D images is if we are adjusting the disparity of any layer. So if an object that initially had a higher disparity is now changed to a one with lower disparity, then the regions that it was covering in the image are now exposed and hence causes holes. Another one reason is because of existence of noise in the image, and all these small areas of noise can also be covered using inpainting. Now let's talk about the stereo image inpainting approaches that were previously presented. So just like the 2D images, if we use a PDE based inpainting approach and propagate the pixels towards from the boundaries to the holes, does that work for 3D images? Not really. That's because the boundaries of each region could be of different disparities. So we'd potentially be using color information of a image that's way above the background on some hole that exists on the background. So this technique is not very useful when it comes to processing the holes in 3D images. Another approach that was presented by He et al. Was finding similar patches for the holes in a single image and using the information of the patch to fill colors and disparity of the missing region. So one thing that's missing in this approach is that the inpainting happens on each of the stereo image separately. So this way the consistency is not maintained with what is filled in the holes. And one more thing that this approach misses is the information that is presented in half occluded regions. Suppose there's a region in the left image that is hidden in the right image. So we could just propagate this information to the right image when we are filling a hole in that region. But using such an approach, since we are processing each of the images separately, this cannot be done anymore. Now, the next approach that was presented by Wang et al. Was warping the half-uploaded regions and then separately filling each image. But now, since there might be inconsistency while filling the images separately, the areas that show low stereo consistency are processed again and filled using the same technique. So this method runs in many iterations, and at every step it finds out the regions that are still not consistent in both images and fills them again. Now another approach that was presented is the one by Morse et al. And this included filling holes in the disparity map, then inpainting each image using source regions of both images and using disparity values to penalize stereoscopic inconsistencies while selecting the best match. So here we are not warping the half occluded region information from one image to another. Instead, while filling the patch in each image, we are considering the pixel information from both the images as source. So in this way, if a region which is hidden in one image but existing in another image would directly be considered using patch match, and the map due to the nearest neighbor similarity, these both would be matched and the information would not have to be propagated separately. And one final technique that was discussed by Eisted et al. Was filling holes in the disparity map and then filling the color in the merged layer of the identified disparity using its own pixels. So this technique is similar to the approach that is presented in my project, so we'll discuss a little more about it later. So let's start discussing the proposed approach. The main aim of this approach is to divide the stereo image into layers based on pixel disparities and proactively fill holes in each layers. So here we are potentially moving the hole filling stage as a pre-processing step and already dividing the image into multiple layers, figuring out where the holes could exist in each layer and already filling them before the user is manipulating them in any way to remove an object, move an object, or change the disparities. Now let's talk about the different steps that are involved in the proposed approach. First, we divide the left and right images into multiple disparity layers. Then we merge the layers of same disparity so that the half occluded pixels that are only present in one of the image are also present in the other without having to perform any warping step. Then we group the layers to get enough pixels because it's highly possible that just a few layers or a layer by itself does not have enough pixels. And after that, we identify the holes in each group. In the next step, we fill these holes using patch match with pixels of the group as the source. Then we split the merged layers with inpainting into the left and right images so that the inpainting is consistent in both of them. This way we don't have to add some extra functionality like penalizing or iterating multiple times in order to make sure that there's consistency, as both the left and right images are filled together. And finally, we output all the left images and the right images into two Photoshop files, which makes the manipulation of the images easier. Now let's discuss each of these steps in detail. So first we divide both the left and right images into multiple layers based on their disparity. That means a layer with disparity D contains only those pixels of the image which contain disparity D. This way, once we find LD and RD, which represent the left and right image layers of disparity D, we merge both of them together. So while merging, we take the left image and then we superimpose the right image on top of it after leaving an offset of D. And since both the left and right images are present at the same disparity, the pixels generally overlap correctly and no object that's present in the layer is deformed. As you can see, in the left image, the circular region is towards the closer to the right, and in the right image it's closer to the left. But once we merge them by leaving a disparity of D, the ball only exists in one region and there is no inconsistency in this layer. So these merged layers contain the pixel of both the left and right images. Now if you have a look at these photos, the circular regions in the first two images depict regions that are present only in the left image but are covered in the right image, or vice versa. So but when we merge both of these layers together, both of these circular regions are present in the merged layer. So this shows that the regions that are covered by the foreground objects in one image but not in the other, those pixel information is still maintained without having to perform any extra warping step. And extra warping steps generally do not work well near the boundaries, and hence this is a way better method for performing this operation. In the next step, we group multiple layers together. We do this because in reality, each layer might not have enough pixels to fill in the holes that form in that layer. So because of that, we group layers until we find enough pixels in the entire group, and then we use that to find holes and fill in those holes. A little more information about the choices that were made in grouping the layers is presented in this slide. Now here's an illustration of why grouping is required. The GIF on the left side shows the pixels of each layer, and Since the first layer is not enough, we are adding the pixel information of the second layer on top of it, and then the third layer, and so on until we have enough information to fill in the hole. On the right side, we can see the image of the entire group, and we can notice that the pixels information that is present is enough to fill in the holes of that region, and hence we stop this group with these layers. Now let's discuss how we identify holes in an image. So for this, let's consider a trivial case in which we have a rectangular object in the background and a circular object on top of it in the foreground. Now, if we move the circular object away, we can see a hole in the rectangular region. So in general, we can identify these holes as the pixel positions which have disparities that are higher than the current layer. This just means that every object that could possibly cover a region in the current layer exists at a higher layer. Because if an object existed at a lower layer, then it would be behind this object and would not obstruct any pixels of this object. So we can assume that every region in the image layer that has a higher disparity corresponds to a hole. But there's an issue with such an approach. Like, consider this example in which both the circles are at a higher layer and the rectangle is at a lower layer. Now, if we, from our previous definition, we can consider every pixel with a higher disparity as a whole. In this case, we would consider the region that's covered by both these circles as the whole and try to cover it. So when we do that in the previous layer, we would have a circular region with blue towards in the location of the right circle. But that's not what we want. We just want to fill in the region that is covered by the circle and still belongs to the rectangle. So how do we generalize this, and how do we find out which area should belongs to the whole of that layer and which area does not? So the approach that's proposed to do this is by using a convex hull of all the pixels that are present in the layer. Now, the first image here shows the group pixels, and we are supposed to only fill the hole that belongs to the semicircle covering the rectangle and not all the areas which have higher disparities. Like we've seen this in the previous slide, that if we consider every region with a higher disparity, we would also have an other circle on towards the right of this image, which is what we need to avoid. So while considering a convex hull of all the pixels in the layer, we only cover the region that the pixels enclose. And this way we can determine all the pixels that are inside the convex hull with higher disparities and consider those to be the whole. Now the final image here shows a mask that represents the hole to be filled, which is a semicircle that is needed to be filled by the blue pixels. So this way we determine what is the exact region that corresponds to the hole, and we already know the pixel that correspond to the source. Now, apart from the pixels that belong to the source and the hole, the entire region of the layer is given a transparent number in the transparency matrix. And also all the missing pixels in the group that are and the identified holes are given a white color. So typically the first image that we can see is what we'll be using for inpainting. The first image here contains all the pixels that belongs to one of the group in of an image in a Middlebury dataset. Now this image is input into the patch matching algorithm, which considers all the white regions of the image as a whole and fills them up. But now we know that the white region not only belongs to the holes, but also belongs to the area that's outside the convex hull. Hence we use the transparency matrix that we created in the previous slide to cut off the extra region, and the second image depicts only the region that belongs to the source image and to the filled image. Now the white regions that are still present in the second image belongs to a group that is low with which has layers with lower disparity, and hence we don't have to fill them up again. We only have to fill the regions that are covered by layers of higher disparity. Now all the pixels that are filled in this grouped layer are moved on and copied to the merged layer with highest disparity. This way we add this merged layer into the list of all the layers that we already have, and this can depict the whole regions filled. Now that we have all the merged layers of an image with the holes filled, we need to separate them out into the left and right image. In the similar way as to how we created the merged image by superimposing the left and right image, we split them out by using an offset of the disparity that belongs to that layer. So here is an image that demonstrates this. This image actually belongs to a paper by Professor Eisted, but which actually performs a disparity correction. But in our case, we won't use a new disparity, but we will use the same disparity of that layer to split the merged layer into a left and right image. So using this approach, we were able to divide the left and right image of a stereo image pair into multiple layers, identify the holes in them, and proactively fill them up with the pixels of the surrounding layers. Now that we've done that, we output all these layers with the filled information into a Photoshop file so that we can interact with them easily. Now here's one example which contains the output of an image from the Middlebury dataset, and we will be removing the yellow triangle region that's on top of the image and see that the background behind the image is already filled. So here we are selecting the entire layer and deleting it, but we could use Photoshop lasso tool to just select the region that is covered by the triangle and only remove that. So as you can see, the background is already present and we don't have to fill them up separately. Having discussed the proposed approach and all the steps that are involved in it, let's talk about a few limitations that were identified. So the pre-processing step of the images to generate PSD files is time consuming. We are potentially filling up the holes using patch match for every layer which the user might not require. The user might only move an object in one part of the image, but we are filling up the layers and the holes that could exist in every other part of the image. So this could be time consuming, but once the image is generated, it will be easier to work with in Photoshop. And then the left and right images of the grouped layers are merged with the highest disparity of the group. So when we merge two layers with the same disparity together, there is no inconsistency in the merged image. But since we are considering a group of disparities, all the lower level disparities from the left image and the right image might overlap one another and form certain inconsistencies in the image. The convex hull is used to find the boundaries for limiting the region that contains the hole. So this might not be satisfactory in every scenario, and there might be some instances in which the region covered by convex hull might not be enough, and there might be some holes that are still not filled. And multiple backgrounds could be generated for an object based on their relative positioning in the image. So the user might potentially have to erase multiple layers until they find the inpainting that satisfies them. And finally, generation of a Photoshop file is done using Photoshop scripting in the current implementation, which is only supported in Windows systems. The way that the scripting is done is it directly interacts with the Photoshop application, and this is not supported by Linux systems. So these are some limitations that I had identified so far. Hope you guys enjoyed the project and let me know of any comments that you have. Thank you so much.